Some children cry when they're afraid. The Mafia Alpha's son destroyed every nanny who ever tried to love him. The rain came down in silver sheets over Manhattan, turning the windows of the Moretti estate into blurred mirrors of lightning and shadow. Ethan Cole stood beneath the massive iron gates with one hand gripping the strap of his worn messenger bag and the other clutching the printed job listing that had changed his life 3 days ago. Live-in nanny needed. Private residence. Exceptional salary. Immediate hire. No agencies involved. He should have known something was wrong the second nobody would explain why the pay was nearly 3 times the normal rate. The guard at the front gate barely glanced at him before speaking into an earpiece. A moment later, the gates slowly opened with a metallic groan that echoed straight into Ethan's chest. The estate looked less like a home and more like a fortress hidden in the middle of the city. Black SUVs lined the circular driveway. Men in dark suits stood beneath the marble overhang, their sharp eyes tracking every movement. Ethan swallowed hard as he climbed the front steps. He almost turned around right there. But then he remembered the overdue hospital bills folded inside his apartment drawer and his younger sister sleeping beneath thin blankets with a fever she couldn't afford to treat. So he forced himself forward. The front doors opened before he could knock. "You're late," a tall beta man said flatly. "Traffic," Ethan answered quietly. The man stared at him for a second before stepping aside. "Mr. Moretti is waiting." Ethan followed him through hallways so polished they reflected the dim chandelier light like still water. Everything inside felt cold, perfect, silent. There were no family photos, no warmth, no sign that a child actually lived here. Only expensive furniture arranged like pieces in a museum nobody was allowed to touch. The beta stopped outside a pair of dark wooden doors. "One rule," he said. "If the boy tells you to leave, you leave immediately." Ethan frowned. "That's it." The man's expression didn't change. "You'll understand soon enough." The doors opened. Vincent Moretti stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-soaked skyline, one hand tucked into the pocket of a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in a year. He was taller than Ethan expected, broad-shouldered and impossibly composed, with dark hair swept neatly away from a face carved from sharp lines and quiet exhaustion. His silver-gray eyes lifted slowly toward Ethan, cold enough to stop breathing. Ethan suddenly understood why people whispered about Vincent Moretti online without ever saying his name too loudly. Power clung to him like smoke. "You're 24, Vincent said after glancing at the file in his hand. "Yes." "No professional childcare experience." "Not officially." "Then why are you here?" Ethan hesitated. Because he was desperate sounded pathetic. Because he needed money sounded dangerous. So he answered honestly. "Because I'm good with people who feel alone." Something unreadable flickered across Vincent's face before disappearing instantly. "My son doesn't speak," Vincent said. "He hasn't spoken in almost 2 years. Every nanny we hired lasted less than a week." Ethan nodded carefully. "Okay." Vincent studied him in silence, as though waiting for fear to settle into Ethan's bones. "If Noah rejects you," he said quietly, "this conversation ends." Before Ethan could answer, something crashed upstairs. Glass shattered. Footsteps thundered across the ceiling. The entire house seemed to tense at once. Vincent didn't react, but Ethan noticed the slight tightening in his jaw. A few seconds later, a small figure appeared at the top of the staircase. Barefoot, silent. A little boy with messy black hair and pale skin stood clutching the railing in tiny fingers. His blue-gray eyes landed directly on Ethan. The room held its breath. Ethan waited for screaming, for another object to break, for the rejection everyone expected. But Noah Moretti simply stared at him for a long moment before slowly walking downstairs. One step at a time. The child stopped directly in front of Ethan. Then, without warning, Noah reached out and grabbed the sleeve of Ethan's sweater with trembling fingers. The entire room went still. Ethan looked down at the boy in shock. Behind him, one of the guards muttered a curse beneath his breath. Because according to everyone in that house, Noah Moretti had never willingly touched anyone before. The first thing Ethan noticed about Noah's bedroom was that it did not look like a child lived there. The room was enormous, almost the size of Ethan's old apartment in Brooklyn, with tall windows draped in dark curtains and shelves lined with untouched toys that looked expensive enough to belong behind glass. Everything was perfectly organized. Too organized. Like someone had built a room based on what children were supposed to like without understanding what loneliness could do to a little boy. Noah stood near the doorway clutching the sleeve of Ethan's sweater while 3 house staff members stared like they had just witnessed a ghost. Ethan could practically feel their confusion pressing into the silence. "Noah," Vincent said evenly from behind them, "let go." The child's fingers tightened instead. Ethan glanced down carefully. Noah was small for 6 years old, thin beneath his oversized black sweatshirt, his pale face half hidden by messy dark hair. He did not look angry. He looked exhausted, like he had spent too long waiting for something that never came back. Vincent stepped into the room slowly. The air changed the moment he entered, heavy with quiet authority. "You can leave us," he told the staff. Nobody argued. Within seconds, the room emptied until only Ethan, Noah, and Vincent remained beneath the dim golden light. Ethan shifted awkwardly. "Should I say something?" Vincent's expression remained unreadable. "If he wants you to." Noah still had not spoken a single word. Ethan lowered himself carefully onto the edge of the rug so he would not tower over the child. "Hi, Noah," he said softly. "I am Ethan." No response. The little boy stared at him with those pale silver-blue eyes that looked far too old for someone his age. Ethan noticed faint shadows beneath them, like Noah had trouble sleeping. There were tiny crescent marks near his sleeves too, as though he chewed the fabric whenever he felt nervous. Ethan knew the signs. His younger sister used to do the same thing during hospital visits. "Your room is really cool," Ethan continued gently. "I like the stars." Noah blinked once. Ethan followed his gaze upward and realized the ceiling had been painted like a night sky, tiny lights glowing softly between constellations. It was beautiful in a heartbreaking sort of way. Someone had tried very hard to build this child a universe. But warmth could not be bought in pieces. "He likes storms," Vincent said quietly from across the room. Ethan looked back at him, surprised he was still there. Vincent leaned against the doorway with his sleeves rolled slightly past his wrists. Watching them with the same careful attention Ethan imagined dangerous men used before making impossible decisions. "Most children hate thunder," Ethan said. "Noah does not." Vincent's gaze shifted toward his son. "It helps him sleep." Another silence settled over the room, softer this time. Ethan noticed a stack of papers on the floor beside the bed. Drawings. Crayon sketches filled with dark buildings and endless rain. But every single page had the same figure standing somewhere in the corner. A tall man with black hair. "Vincent." Noah suddenly tugged Ethan's sleeve again before walking toward a small corner near the bookshelf. He crouched down and disappeared behind it for a second before returning with something clutched against his chest. A stuffed gray wolf. One of the ears was stitched unevenly by hand. Noah held it out toward Ethan with hesitant fingers. Vincent straightened slightly behind them. "He does not let anyone touch that," he said quietly. Ethan accepted the wolf carefully, like it was something sacred. "Thank you," he whispered. Noah climbed onto the bed afterward and curled beneath the blankets without another sound. Ethan sat nearby while rain tapped softly against the windows. 5 minutes later, Noah's breathing finally slowed into sleep. Ethan looked up and found Vincent staring at them both with an expression that did not belong on the face of a man feared across the entire city. It was not anger. It was not suspicion. It looked dangerously close to hope. Ethan woke up at 3:17 in the morning because somebody was crying. Not loudly. Not the kind of crying children usually made after nightmares. This sounded smaller somehow, like someone trying very hard not to be heard. For a few confused seconds, Ethan forgot where he was. Then he saw the unfamiliar ceiling above him and remembered the massive estate, the silent little boy, and the silver-eyed Alpha who carried exhaustion like a second skin. The crying came again. Soft. Broken. Ethan threw on a hoodie and stepped into the dark hallway, following the sound through the quiet mansion. The house felt completely different at night. The expensive walls and polished marble no longer looked elegant. They looked lonely. Empty corridors stretched beneath dim lights, while rain tapped gently against distant windows. Ethan passed 2 guards near the staircase. Neither stopped him. One of them simply nodded toward the east wing before looking away again. Ethan remembered Vincent's rule immediately. Do not enter the east wing. He hesitated. The crying came again. Then silence. Ethan's chest tightened. He moved anyway. The east wing was colder than the rest of the house, almost untouched by warmth. Family portraits lined the walls, but every single one stopped 6 years ago. Ethan noticed that immediately. There were pictures of Vincent holding a newborn Noah with an expression so soft it barely looked like the same man. Another showed a beautiful Omega with pale blonde hair standing beside them beneath falling snow, smiling directly at the camera. Noah had her eyes. Ethan slowed near the final hallway. A faint light spilled from a half-open doorway. Inside, Noah sat curled in the middle of the floor, clutching the stuffed wolf tightly against his chest. Thunder rumbled outside the windows, and each distant sound made the little boy flinch. Ethan's heart sank when he realized where they were. The room belonged to Noah's mother. Nothing had been moved. Dresses still hung beside the windows. Books rested neatly on the shelves. A half-finished cup of tea sat beside the bed as though someone had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. Noah looked impossibly small sitting alone in the center of all that silence. Ethan slowly crouched a few feet away. "Hey," he whispered gently. Noah did not look at him. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, and the child immediately buried his face against the wolf. Ethan noticed the closet door nearby was slightly open. Blanket pillows were piled inside like a tiny hiding place. Suddenly everything made sense. Storms helped Noah sleep because storms were loud enough to drown out memories. Ethan sat down quietly on the carpet. "When I was little," he said softly, "my sister used to hide in laundry baskets during thunderstorms." Noah remained motionless. Ethan continued anyway. "She said small spaces felt safer because the world could not reach her there." The little boy's fingers tightened around the stuffed wolf. Ethan did not move closer. He did not try to touch him. He simply stayed. Minutes passed beneath the sound of rain. Then Noah slowly crawled toward the closet and disappeared inside without a word. Ethan looked down for a second before carefully moving closer to the doorway. Noah sat curled beneath the blankets with frightened silver-blue eyes staring into darkness. Ethan leaned gently against the wall outside the closet. "Do you want me to stay here?" he asked quietly. Noah did not answer. But after a few seconds, a tiny hand slowly emerged from the blankets and grabbed the sleeve of Ethan's hoodie. Ethan felt something crack softly inside his chest. So he stayed there on the floor beside the closet while thunder rolled across Manhattan, and the little boy finally drifted asleep, holding on to him like he was afraid the world might disappear again. Ethan did not notice Vincent standing silently at the end of the hallway until the storm was already over. The next morning, Ethan found Noah sitting beneath the kitchen table with a flashlight and 3 crayons clenched tightly in his small hands. Sunlight spilled through the enormous windows of the Moretti estate, warming the marble floors with pale gold, but the house still felt too quiet for a place where people actually lived. Somewhere in the distance, staff members moved carefully through hallways like they were afraid to make noise. Ethan crouched beside the table with a small plate of pancakes balanced in one hand. "Good hiding spot," he said softly. Noah glanced up for half a second before lowering his eyes again. Ethan noticed the little boy was wearing the same oversized sweatshirt from yesterday, sleeves covering most of his fingers. The stuffed gray wolf sat tucked beside him protectively. "I brought breakfast," Ethan continued. "The chef threatened to fire me if you skipped another meal." That earned the tiniest reaction. Not a smile exactly, but Noah's shoulders loosened just a little. Ethan carefully slid the plate beneath the table. "Blueberries on the side because I guessed you would hate syrup." Noah stared at the plate suspiciously for a moment before slowly reaching for one piece of pancake. Ethan sat cross-legged nearby, without saying another word. Silence felt different around Noah. It was not empty. It was cautious, like the little boy had spent too long learning that speaking only made people leave. Ethan understood that kind of silence more than he wanted to admit. A few minutes later, footsteps entered the kitchen. Ethan looked up and immediately straightened slightly. Vincent stood near the doorway in a fitted black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly past his forearms, silver cufflinks catching the morning light. He looked like he had not slept at all. His expression remained calm, but there were faint shadows beneath his eyes now that Ethan knew to look for them. Vincent's gaze moved slowly from Ethan to the plate beneath the table, then to Noah. The child was eating. One of the kitchen staff nearly dropped a tray in shock before quickly pretending nothing happened. Vincent noticed too. Ethan could tell by the way the Alpha suddenly went very still. "He usually refuses breakfast," Vincent said quietly. Ethan glanced toward Noah. Maybe he just wanted company. Vincent's silver-gray eyes lingered on Ethan longer than necessary. It was not intimidating this time. It felt more like confusion. Like he could not understand how someone Noah met less than 24 hours ago had already crossed walls nobody else could reach in years. Noah suddenly crawled farther beneath the table and tugged lightly on Ethan's sleeve. Ethan blinked. "You want me down there too?" Noah nodded once. Tiny, hesitant, but unmistakable. Ethan smiled softly before sliding beneath the table beside him. The space was small and warm compared to the giant kitchen around them. Noah quietly handed Ethan a blue crayon without looking directly at him. "Oh," Ethan whispered dramatically. "This is serious. I have been chosen." Another tiny reaction. Noah's mouth twitched slightly before he looked away again. Ethan grabbed one of the blank paper napkins nearby and started sketching terrible stick figures on purpose. "This one is me," he explained seriously. "As you can see, I am extremely handsome." Noah stared at the drawing for 2 seconds before something impossible happened. A soft sound escaped him. Not a word, not even close, but unmistakably a laugh. Ethan froze. Across the kitchen, Vincent did too. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Noah immediately looked startled by the sound himself, like he had forgotten he could still make one. Then his small face slowly lowered behind the stuffed wolf again. Ethan pretended not to notice how tightly the little boy suddenly clung to it. Instead, he quietly continued drawing ridiculous stick figures beneath the table while sunlight spilled around them in warm golden squares. And for the first time in years, the Moretti estate no longer felt entirely haunted. By the end of Ethan's first week at the estate, Noah had started following him everywhere like a silent little shadow. The boy never spoke, but somehow Ethan always knew exactly what he wanted. A small tug on his sleeve meant Noah was hungry. 2 taps against Ethan's wrist meant he wanted another story before bed. And whenever Noah quietly placed the stuffed gray wolf beside Ethan during movie nights, it meant he was scared the nightmares would come back after he fell asleep. Ethan learned the rhythm of the house slowly. The kitchen staff relaxed when he entered now. The guards stopped watching him like an intruder. Even the giant mansion itself seemed less cold with Noah's drawings taped unevenly onto refrigerators and hallway tables. But Vincent Moretti remained impossible to understand. Some mornings, Ethan would find him sitting silently at the dining table before sunrise with untouched coffee growing cold beside stacks of paperwork. Other days, Vincent disappeared entirely, leaving before Noah woke and returning long after midnight with exhaustion carved deep into his face. Yet no matter how late it was, Vincent always checked Noah's room first. Ethan noticed that immediately. One Thursday evening, Ethan sat on the living room floor helping Noah build a crooked pillow fort while rain tapped softly against the windows again. Noah was concentrating very seriously on balancing a blanket over the couch cushions when the front doors opened somewhere down the hall. The atmosphere in the house shifted instantly. Guards straightened. Staff members lowered their voices. Ethan looked up just as Vincent entered the room. His black overcoat was damp from rain, dark hair slightly disheveled like he had been running his hands through it all night. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Soul tired. Noah noticed him too. The little boy froze for half a second before quietly moving closer to Ethan instead of his father. Something flickered across Vincent's face so quickly Ethan almost missed it. Hurt. Tiny. Carefully hidden. Ethan's chest tightened unexpectedly. "We are building a fortress," Ethan explained lightly, trying to ease the tension. Vincent loosened his tie slightly while watching them. "I can see that." Noah peeked cautiously over Ethan's shoulder, clutching part of his hoodie in one hand. Vincent's silver-gray eyes softened almost invisibly at the sight. "Did he eat dinner?" he asked quietly. 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and half a bowl of strawberries. Vincent nodded once like that information mattered more than anything else he had dealt with all day. Ethan suddenly realized nobody in this house probably gave Vincent ordinary updates anymore. They feared him too much. Noah carefully lifted one side of the blanket fort toward Ethan before glancing briefly at Vincent. Ethan blinked in surprise. "You want him to help?" Noah lowered his eyes immediately, but he did not let go of the blanket. Vincent stayed completely still. Ethan was not even sure the Alpha was breathing anymore. "Well," Ethan said softly, "I guess this mission requires another engineer." For a moment Vincent did not move. Then slowly, carefully, He removed his expensive watch and set it on the table nearby, before kneeling beside the fort and rolled-up dress sleeves that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. Noah watched him cautiously the entire time. Vincent adjusted one side of the blanket with surprising gentleness. "Structural support is weak here," he said seriously. Ethan stared at him before laughing softly. "You have definitely built pillow forts before." Vincent's hands paused briefly against the blanket fabric. "A long time ago." Silence settled again, but this time it was warm instead of painful. Noah slowly crawled into the center of the fort and looked between them both before holding out the stuffed gray wolf toward Vincent. Ethan felt the entire room stop. Vincent looked almost startled as he accepted the toy carefully from his son's small hands. The Alpha's expression changed completely then. Not cold, not feared, just heartbreakingly human. And when Noah finally leaned sleepily against Ethan's side while Vincent sat inches away beneath the crooked blanket fort, Ethan realized something dangerous was happening inside this house. They were beginning to feel like a family. 2 weeks after Ethan arrived at the Moretti estate, Noah finally stepped outside for the first time in almost a year. The entire household noticed immediately. Guards exchanged surprised looks near the front entrance while staff members pretended not to stare as Ethan helped Noah into a tiny gray coat with little silver buttons. Noah stood perfectly still through the whole process, clutching the stuffed wolf beneath one arm while Ethan fixed the scarf around his neck. "You look dangerously fashionable," Ethan whispered seriously. Noah blinked up at him before hiding the smallest hint of a smile against the scarf. It was cold outside, the kind of sharp Manhattan winter morning where breath curled visibly in the air and the sidewalks glittered faintly from last night's snow. Ethan held Noah's hand carefully as they walked through the estate gardens. The little boy stayed close, his tiny fingers wrapped tightly around Ethan's sleeve instead of his hand directly, but Ethan did not mind. Progress was progress. Behind them, 2 security vehicles followed slowly at a distance. Ethan tried not to think too hard about why a 6-year-old needed that level of protection. Noah stopped near the frozen fountain in the center of the garden and stared silently at the snow collecting on the stone edges. Ethan crouched beside him. "You know," he said softly, "when I was little, I thought snow only happened in movies." Noah looked at him curiously. "My sister and I grew up in Arizona for a while," Ethan explained. "The first time she saw snow, she tried to catch every snowflake with a kitchen bowl." Noah's shoulders shook slightly with another silent laugh. Ethan smiled automatically at the sound. It still felt precious every time it happened. Then Noah suddenly froze. Ethan felt it immediately. The little boy's grip tightened painfully around his sleeve. Ethan followed his gaze toward the front gates. A black SUV had stopped outside. 3 unfamiliar men stepped out wearing dark coats and polished shoes that looked too expensive for a casual visit. Even from across the courtyard, the atmosphere shifted sharply. Noah moved closer to Ethan instantly. Fear rolled off him in waves, so strong Ethan could almost feel it physically. One of the guards near the entrance immediately spoke into an earpiece. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Hey," he whispered gently, crouching beside Noah again. "It is okay." But Noah's breathing had already become uneven. The child buried his face against Ethan's side, trembling beneath the little gray coat. Ethan did not hesitate. He wrapped both arms around Noah protectively and guided him backward toward the house. "Look at me," Ethan whispered softly. "You are safe. I promise." The little boy shook harder instead. Ethan glanced toward the gates again, just as Vincent's car pulled sharply into the driveway. The Alpha stepped out immediately, his expression cold enough to freeze the air itself. He looked toward the men at the gate only briefly before his attention snapped directly toward Noah. And the moment Vincent saw his son shaking in Ethan's arms, something terrifyingly controlled settled across his face. Not rage. Worse, absolute calm. Vincent crossed the courtyard quickly, coat moving sharply behind him in the winter wind. Noah looked up the second he approached, silver blue, eyes wide with panic. Vincent immediately lowered himself to one knee in front of his son without caring about the snow soaking into expensive black slacks. "Noah," he said quietly. The child could barely breathe. Ethan felt his own chest ache watching it. Vincent looked at Ethan once. Just once. But that single look carried something heavy and unspoken. "Trust me." Ethan slowly loosened his hold enough for Noah to see his father clearly. Vincent reached forward carefully, like approaching something fragile. "You are safe," he said again, calm and steady. "Nobody here will hurt you." Noah stared at him with trembling lips and frightened eyes full of storms too big for a child his age. Then suddenly, for the first time in 2 years, the little boy spoke. His voice came out tiny and cracked from disuse, barely louder than falling snow. "Do not let them take Ethan." Silence crashed across the courtyard. Ethan forgot how to breathe. Vincent's entire expression broke apart for one devastating second before he pulled Noah gently into his arms and held him like the most precious thing left in the world. The house stayed unusually quiet after Noah spoke. Not because anyone was upset, because nobody knew how to react. Staff members whispered carefully in corners while guards avoided looking directly at Ethan like he had somehow performed a miracle inside the walls of the Moretti estate. Noah himself seemed confused by it most of all. He barely left Ethan's side for the rest of the day, small fingers constantly gripping the sleeve of Ethan's sweater as though he was afraid the words would disappear if he let go. Ethan sat with him in the library that evening while snow drifted softly outside the enormous windows. Noah rested quietly beneath a mountain of blankets on the couch beside him, pretending to color while secretly falling asleep one slow blink at a time. Ethan smiled faintly and adjusted the blanket higher around the little boy's shoulders. "You had a big day, huh?" Noah lowered his eyes shyly. His voice had only appeared once, but somehow the silence around him felt different now. Softer, less trapped. Ethan looked down at the coloring page in Noah's lap and froze slightly. The drawing showed 3 figures standing beneath falling snow. One tall man with black hair, one smaller figure with messy brown hair, and Noah in the middle holding both their hands. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. Before he could say anything, the library doors opened quietly. Vincent stepped inside wearing dark slacks and a charcoal sweater instead of his usual suits. Somehow the softer clothes made him look even more dangerous. Or maybe just more tired. Noah looked up immediately. For a second, Ethan thought the little boy might panic again after what happened earlier at the gates. Instead, Noah slowly lifted the drawing toward his father. Vincent stopped walking the moment he saw it. Silence settled over the room. Ethan watched Vincent's expression carefully as the Alpha approached the couch. Noah stayed still this time. No trembling, no fear. Vincent crouched slowly beside him, eyes fixed on the paper in his son's tiny hands. "Did you draw this?" he asked quietly. Noah nodded once. Vincent stared at the picture for several long seconds before looking toward Ethan. Something unreadable passed through his silver-gray eyes. Grief, gratitude, maybe both. "He has not drawn people together before," Vincent admitted softly. Ethan glanced back at the drawing. The 3 figures stood close enough that their shoulders touched. Like a family. Noah suddenly shifted closer to Ethan beneath the blanket and leaned sleepily against his side. The movement was small, instinctive, but Vincent noticed it instantly. Ethan expected jealousy, tension. Instead, Vincent only looked down at his son with heartbreaking relief. Like seeing Noah trust someone again mattered more than his own pride. "Those men today," Ethan said carefully after a moment, keeping his voice low. "Did they scare him because of what happened to his mother?" Vincent went completely still. Noah's fingers tightened around the crayon in his hand. Ethan immediately regretted asking. But Vincent surprised him. The Alpha looked toward the snowy windows instead of away. "My mate died 3 years ago," he said quietly. After that, Noah stopped speaking. Ethan's heart ached instantly. Vincent's voice remained calm, but the grief beneath it sounded old and endless. "The men at the gates worked for families who believed my son would make me weak." Ethan looked down at Noah, sleeping quietly against him, tiny fingers still curled around the crayon. Weak. The word felt impossible beside a child who had survived this much sadness. Vincent stepped closer to the couch then, careful and silent. He reached down slowly to brush dark hair away from Noah's forehead with a tenderness so gentle it almost hurt to watch. Noah did not flinch from the touch. Ethan looked up at Vincent and realized something important in that moment. The most feared man in New York was not dangerous because he felt nothing. He was dangerous because he loved too deeply and had already lost too much. Vincent's hand lingered briefly against Noah's hair before he spoke again, voice quieter than snowfall outside the windows. "He talks to you because you make this house feel alive again." And for the first time since Ethan arrived, Vincent looked at him not like an employee or a stranger, but like someone who had unknowingly become part of their broken little world. The first time Noah called Ethan by name, it happened during a snowstorm. The city had disappeared beneath thick white snowfall overnight, turning the massive windows of the Moretti estate into glowing walls of silver and frost. Ethan stood in the kitchen early that morning wearing soft flannel pajama pants and one of the oversized sweaters Noah liked stealing from his room because it smelled warm. At least that was how Noah described it now in his tiny, careful voice whenever Ethan asked why the sweaters kept disappearing. The little boy sat on the counter wrapped in blankets while watching Ethan attempt pancakes with deep suspicion. "You are making them too big," Noah said quietly, holding the stuffed wolf in his lap. Ethan gasped dramatically. "Excuse me, these are artisan pancakes." Noah blinked slowly. "They look weird." Ethan clutched his chest in fake heartbreak while Noah smiled into the blanket. It was still a small smile, still fragile, but it appeared more often now. The kitchen doors opened before Ethan could defend his cooking further. Vincent stepped inside wearing dark sweatpants and a black long-sleeved shirt, his hair slightly messy like he had only just woken up. Ethan nearly dropped the spatula. Seeing Vincent dressed casually still felt strange somehow, like discovering winter could actually feel warm. Noah immediately brightened at the sight of his father. "Papa," he whispered softly. Vincent froze for half a second before crossing the kitchen toward him. Ethan noticed the way Vincent's entire expression softened whenever Noah spoke now, like every word was something precious he still could not believe had returned. Vincent pressed a kiss gently against Noah's hair before looking toward the stove. "Are those edible?" he asked Ethan seriously. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You know, criticism is not welcome in my kitchen." Noah giggled quietly into the blanket. Vincent looked visibly startled by the sound again, even after hearing it several times over the past week. It was obvious he still had not recovered from the miracle of Noah laughing. None of them really had. Ethan turned back toward the stove while Vincent settled beside Noah at the counter. For a few peaceful minutes, the kitchen filled with ordinary sounds instead of silence. Coffee brewing, snow falling softly outside, Noah quietly explaining why stuffed wolves probably could not eat pancakes because they were carnivores. Ethan realized then that this was what healing actually looked like. Not grand moments, not dramatic speeches, just warmth returning slowly to places that had been cold for too long. He glanced toward Vincent accidentally and found the Alpha already watching him. Ethan's breath caught slightly. Vincent's silver-gray eyes looked softer lately, less guarded, more dangerous in a completely different way. "What?" Ethan asked quietly. Vincent leaned one arm against the counter beside Noah. "The house sounds different when you are here." Ethan looked down quickly before the warmth rising into his face became obvious. Noah glanced between them both silently with the terrifying observation skills only children seem to possess. Then, very casually, he climbed down from the counter with the stuffed wolf tucked beneath one arm. "Where are you going?" Ethan asked suspiciously. Noah pointed toward the living room. "Movie." Ethan blinked. "Without pancakes." Noah nodded seriously. "You two talk." Vincent nearly choked on his coffee while Ethan stared at the 6-year-old in complete betrayal. Noah walked away looking entirely too pleased with himself. Silence settled over the kitchen after he disappeared. Soft, awkward. Snow drifted slowly outside the windows while steam curled upward from forgotten coffee mugs. Ethan reached for a plate nervously, but Vincent's hand closed gently around his wrist first. Not forceful, just warm. Ethan looked up immediately. Vincent's expression held something raw and unguarded Ethan had never seen before. "He has not felt safe with anyone since his mother died," Vincent said quietly. His thumb brushed lightly against Ethan's wrist before he seemed to realize what he was doing. But he did not pull away. "And somehow," Vincent continued softly, "you became home to him anyway." Ethan's chest ached so suddenly it almost hurt to breathe. Because the terrifying thing was that somewhere along the way, this broken little family had started to feel like home to him too. Spring arrived quietly at the Moretti estate. Snow melted from the gardens, revealing green beneath the frost, and sunlight began spilling through the giant windows in warm golden ribbons instead of cold silver shadows. The house changed with the seasons too. Staff members laughed more openly now. Music sometimes drifted from the kitchen in the mornings. Noah's drawings covered entire sections of the refrigerator because Ethan refused to let anyone take them down. For the first time in years, The estate no longer felt like a mausoleum built around grief. It felt lived in, loved in. Ethan stood near the front entrance one Friday afternoon fixing Noah's tiny navy sweater while the little boy bounced excitedly beside him. Today was Noah's first day attending a small private school program in Manhattan. Ethan had worried about it for weeks, but Noah had surprised everyone by asking to go himself. "You remember the rules?" Ethan asked gently. Noah nodded seriously. "Use my words." "Good. And no hiding under tables unless there is a real emergency." Ethan tried not to laugh. "Exactly." Noah adjusted the stuffed gray wolf tucked beneath his arm proudly. Vincent descended the staircase then, dressed in a dark tailored coat with sunglasses tucked into one hand. He still carried that same dangerous presence everywhere he went, the quiet kind of power that made entire rooms straighten instinctively when he entered. But Ethan had learned the truth hidden beneath it. Vincent Moretti was terrifying to the world because the world had never seen him kneeling on the kitchen floor, helping a little boy clean spilled pancake batter at 7 in the morning. Noah immediately ran toward him. "Papa." Vincent caught him effortlessly, one large hand steady against Noah's back. Ethan still noticed the way Vincent's expression softened every single time Noah spoke. Like hearing his son's voice remained the greatest miracle of his life. The drive to the school passed quietly. Noah sat between them in the back seat humming softly, while clutching both Ethan's hand and Vincent's sleeve at the same time like he refused to choose between them. Ethan looked out the window before either of them could notice how emotional that made him. The school itself was small and warm, tucked beside Central Park with colorful murals painted across the front lobby walls. Noah stayed close during the tour, nervous fingers gripping Ethan's hand tightly whenever unfamiliar adults smiled at him. But he did not hide. He did not shut down. He tried, and Ethan felt proud enough to cry over it. A teacher eventually crouched beside Noah with a gentle smile. "Would you like to draw with the other kids?" Noah hesitated before glancing up at Ethan and Vincent both. Vincent gave a small nod. Ethan smiled softly. "We will be right here." Noah inhaled carefully before walking toward the art tables with the stuffed wolf tucked under one arm like armor. Ethan watched him go with his heart somewhere in his throat. "You saved him," Vincent said quietly beside him. Ethan looked over immediately. Vincent was not watching the classroom anymore. He was watching Ethan. "No," Ethan answered softly. "He saved himself. I just stayed long enough for him to trust someone again." Vincent stepped closer then, close enough that Ethan could see faint silver threads hidden near his temples now. Signs of sleepless nights and years spent carrying too much alone. "Stay," Vincent said quietly. Not commanding, not cold, just honest. "Not as an employee, not because no one needs you." Ethan's breath caught. Vincent's silver gray eyes softened in a way that still felt dangerous because nobody had probably ever seen this side of him before. "Stay because somewhere along the way," Vincent continued softly, "you became my home too." Ethan felt warmth rise painfully behind his eyes before he could stop it. Before he could answer, small footsteps suddenly raced across the classroom floor. Noah launched himself directly into Ethan's arms with excited energy neither of them would have believed possible months ago. "Look," Noah said proudly, holding up a crayon drawing. 3 figures stood beneath bright yellow sunlight this time instead of snowstorms. Ethan knelt beside him carefully. "It is beautiful," Noah beamed before pointing at the tallest figure in the middle. "That is Papa." Then he pointed at the smaller figure beside him with messy brown hair. "And that is you." Ethan smiled softly. "Yeah." Noah nodded seriously before wrapping tiny arms around both Ethan and Vincent at the same time. "My family." Silence fell around them again, but this time it did not hurt. Vincent's hand settled gently against Ethan's back while spring sunlight poured warmly across the classroom floor. And for the first time in a very long time, all 3 of them finally looked like they belonged somewhere.